government of the United States as a mere appendage to their own affairs. And we know now that government by organized money is just as dangerous as government by organized mob. Never before in all our history have these forces been so united against one candidate as they stand today. They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
Okay, and welcome to United Front Radio. This is Kyle McCarthy. Daniela Walls is not with us this weekend, but I have two special guests. It's Matt Folger and Evan Spadoni of the New Deal Renaissance Radio here on UCY.tv, so check that out. Welcome aboard, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Hello.
So we're not totally sure how this is going to proceed today, but I think we want to talk about the American system of political economy and just sort of get into some of the basics of where this comes from and what it is. And, you know, I'm not sure if this is the best way to approach it, but I feel like one way to come at it is, or the way that I got interested personally in economics was just trying to figure out what is a dollar. What, you know, you need these dollars to pay your rent and to buy food and all this stuff, but what does that really represent? And there's sort of two answers out there. One is the libertarian or Republican answer, which is it's a barter token, basically, that, you know, it represents gold or it represents some fraction of a cow or whatever. And then I think on the other side there's this sort of hyper Keynesianism approach, which is a dollar has no intrinsic meaning and it's just kind of something you can print as many of as you need. And, you know, I think starting to get into the American system sort of helped me really understand the idea of money as a political tool and a political fiction and how that's a good thing. Can you guys maybe give some background on sort of how you got into all of this and maybe what your presuppositions were before you got interested in the American system and how they changed afterward? Or?
Sure, but I'd like to follow that line of thinking first about what is a dollar. You know, I think that is kind of an elusive question and probably get to be, you know, it's not really, you can't really define it in a sentence or even a paragraph.
It's too rhetoric-oriented. It's like, it's rife for sophistry. What is a dollar? You can make that sort of anything you want. Bring it into more real terms of...
Yeah, I mean, it's defined ultimately by, like, every interaction it has in the system. And so, you know, some people, you know, want to make their target the money in general. You know, just as if money itself is the problem, and obviously that's massively true. But like, what money is in general just determines what the legal system allows the money to be. So if like usury is, you know, legalized and enabled, then there's you know, a portion of the money definition that must fit that, where you know that's what's going on with the money, so that's what it represents to some extent. You know, if it's extraction, looting. Race to the bottom, all that kind of stuff is legalized, and money takes on a different character that's much more predatory and destructive. But like, if you limit those excesses, then money takes on a different character, right? So it can be much more of what the libertarians want to claim it is. But in order to get to that point, you have to really restrict where the money can go and what it can do, you know?
Well, I don't know. I mean, what do you really think, like, the sort of the Washington consensus is on money? I mean, you've got the Ron Paul stuff, which is, you know, he's whole hog for the gold standard. Do you think that reflects elite opinion correctly, or do they, you know, want to keep the Fed rolling so that Wall Street can borrow money at 0%? Or
yeah, I think that's where it's at. I think the last thing they would ever want to do is kill that golden goose and go for a gold standard.
I think their ideas on money could probably be summarized by like Jay-Z or Kanye West or something like that. Yeah, got to get it, you know, got to get that green, you know. That's probably as far as it goes, you know. I mean, there's really no kind of, you know, I'm getting paid, so therefore, you know, post hoc construct.
What's good for me is good for you. Sort of like,
Right.
good is good for me. There you go.
If I wasn't getting paid, then, it wouldn't be justified. It's just very kind of like after the fact added on of, what a lot of these people are doing.
Right.
And all the justifications come out of that.
I mean, let's just take it to the most abstract sense, just starting with trying to deconstruct the idea that money is barter, or is somehow like a token of what already exists in the system.
Isn't it that, though?
Well, let's just say that I've got an apple tree, and I'm going to pay one of you guys to pick the apples and turn them into applesauce or something. And your payment is going to be 50% of the applesauce. How can I pay that to you when the apples don't exist yet? The tree is just raw potential.
Mm-hmm.
And so even in those terms, it's like, how can I pay you for something that doesn't yet exist?
These examples are so abstract, and you can go anywhere with it, and kind of navel gazing. So I would say, we're trying to build, a super tanker. That's until Bitcoins can buy a super tanker,
yeah,
then they've got major issues. So keep it in productive capacity. The idea of going to, very simple economics 101's examples, things work in the real world. It's just
because the example kind of doesn't bring in the complexity and the scale of what the economics should be, right? So it is accessible, but of course at the same token, it's it's too accessible, because I'm going to do this in my backyard, or kitchen table economics and things like that.
Does that get us maybe at a better understanding of where the American system comes in, where you look at these things that can only really be done with centralized political power as opposed to this decentralized sort of decisions in the marketplace?
Yeah, I would absolutely say that, because if you're looking at something you're trying to build a modern nation state for the 21st and 22nd century, you're not going to be able to do it with the sort of reductionary economics of, I would say lots of libertarians go with the barter trade system instead of trying to do stuff and then figuring out how to make it work with money, with the system that you have, or with the most ideal system that you could achieve through political action. So in the current system right now, if you wanted to do an infrastructure program, which I think is more important than any sort of political thing, if the current administration was we're going to build bullet trains from New York to San Francisco, I'd be all about it, even if it was J.P. Morgan Chase financing it.
Yeah, maybe I don't know. Should we? What's a better way to come at this? Do we want to just go into the history, or some of the stuff you guys have been talking about on your show, just comparing and contrasting?
To go back to the example of shipping and stuff like that, we were following some recent history about, covering the Ricardo Malthus doctrine, basically, or the left wing and right wing versions of imperialism, as I like to call them. You got the ecology, humanity is bad, whatever you want to call it, oppressing the earth, kind of
Alan Watts.
Yeah, that kind of left wing view, and then you got the right wing, the monetarism, and the Ricardo doctrine basically is kind of the kernel of libertarianism, which is that money itself, just seeking a return, is a self-regulating, self-correcting, self-contained system.
Right.
I've looked at all the alternatives of the the end of money. This guy wrote this book, and then of course the Zeitgeist folks, and then of course the Soviet model. Just in the modern sense, it just none of them will work, and I've looked at all of them. But the thing is, they see just changing what money can do as some kind of meager compromise, rather than running. That it's not going to solve everything permanently forever. That's obviously true, but.
And you can debate this stuff forever. That's why it's so important to keep things in reality and move away from ethereal concepts of what is money? What can money do? What is money doing right now? What is it actually doing? And then what does it need to do?
Mm-hmm.
And move it towards the goals you're trying to achieve instead of backwards, and hoping that if you somehow create a system that frees this money supply, that then life can be built up.
Yeah, and if you look at each source of where the money power is being most destructive, then the UFAA, as prescribed solutions to target those exact modes of exploitation. I talked to a guy a couple years ago here that works for a hedge fund in Chicago, and he built algorithms for hyper trading. And he went from being a website developer to an algorithm programmer, and started making about $250,000 a year first year. He said it was the most top secret level of source code. That they're hiding their stuff so well because it's their trade secrets of how they exploit all this stuff, and so they can front run a bunch of trades. Like if you're buying anything on the open stock market, you're paying. You are already paying a Wall Street sales tax. You're just paying it to these hedge funds.
Right.
That's why they're so loaded, because they can. You want to go buy this stock? Okay, you put a bid up. How it works. The stock market's basically like an auction with multiple buyers and multiple sellers, and the range of the price differential on there is called the spread. But when you get up there and you're putting up a buy order, they can go front run a bunch of buying and selling to push the whole spread favorable to them. And then basically you pay that 0.25% or 1%. Some estimates I've seen range it anywhere from 1% to 4%. You're going to be paying closer to 4% on stocks and securities with less liquidity, because they can get in there and just ram it up, and then you're paying that, right? So that's one of the hugest sources of exploitation and usury, because these people are just thieves, and they know it. Like the guy I talked to, they called what they do internally to each other scalping, quote unquote. And it's just total exploitation and provides no benefit whatsoever, right?
And who are the biggest investors in the stock market outside of those, the flash traders? It's like these big mutual funds and...
Yeah, those are like the slow-moving, water buffalo. They're targeted by the, jackals of the... those are always ripe for the thing. The mutual fund goes out there and puts, a buy order for 30,000 shares of some kind of thing. The other companies are already right in there, and they get they are paid, in effect. They're due. So then you try to convince someone, even that works for the mutual fund, hey, with the transaction tax, you would actually be doing a lot better, because then these exploitative in-between people, the people just running between you and the person, like I say, it's like you go buy something at 7-Eleven and the Flash runs and grabs your money and exchanges it with the person you're trying to buy it from, but charges you a fee.
Right. I mean, is this the same thing as arbitrage? Just basically sort of you're controlling the market intelligence, so you know when to buy low and sell high, and just sort of taking advantage of people without as much.
Goldman Sachs has literally co-located their servers directly into the New York Stock Exchange, so it is like a toll gate. You can't not be part of their system, and so you can make the argument for a transaction tax, but even the people like the day traders will say, "Oh no, no way," because it's this mentality that they always think they can win.
Right?
They always think that they can game the system, and some other person's the sucker, and that they can just outsmart, outwit the totally rigged system, and it's just impossible to explain to these people. And you say, "Oh, 1% per transaction," they freak out because they make 120 trades a day. Meanwhile, if there was a transaction tax, even if 0.25%, they would make 3 or 4 trades a day. But the stock market wouldn't have all these exploitive, gouging, short-termism integrated into it, in which you can't win. I mean, the thing is with the market analysis, when someone is 10 milliseconds ahead of you in the trading now, since it's all done by computers, you literally mathematically can't do anything about it. They're living in the future, and your 10 millisecond old information is always it's not only you're getting information behind the curve, what the information is determined by the people that are ahead of you in the market.
Right.
So they're already defining everything that's going on in the trading. So it's totally just a giant gambling house of parasites. And if you had any kind of level of a transaction tax in there at all, you would make huge amounts of money. It would stabilize the markets massively, because you wouldn't have these exploitative interests there. And the argument is, oh, we'll go take our money elsewhere. That's impossible, because their whole it's like a leech or a tick saying, I'm going to go suck blood somewhere else. It's okay, go ahead. What do we care? First of all, if you take your hyper trading money elsewhere, it's not going to matter to us, because what you're doing is not investment and it's not productive whatsoever. And then secondarily, no, you actually have to be here because this is where the blood is.
Right.
Like you have to be in these markets. So even other major institutional investors have already set up their own private exchanges with each other in which hyper trading is just not allowed because they're realizing they're getting fleeced. Someone's always doing the fleecing. Someone's, fleecing somebody else. It's just there's no actual investment, right? But that's the ultimate excess of the money power that we're always criticizing. If these people were making investments, that would be awesome, but it's just not. And fundamentally, hyper trading and robotic trading and computerized algorithmic trading has totally changed the nature of what these markets represent.
It's a similar situation even, if you looked at like agriculture, or I'm sure it's the same in the oil cartel and stuff. Just the control of market intelligence gives you an unfair advantage over people who don't have those resources. Like if you're Cargill and you've got the commodity futures trading arm of your business, you're competing against family farms. Those guys don't know. They're just taking a wild guess as to what kind of production they're going to have at the end of the year, or what they think the price might be, or and you've got your finger on the pulse of everything that's happening in the world. You're manipulating the price. It's basically a heads I win, tails you lose in every part of the economy.
Right. Yeah, and the thing is, the people with the libertarian nostrums, they're like, oh, this and that, this would be nice if it worked this way. And then you start explaining these elements of finance to them, and they're just like, just snooze immediately. And it's like, okay, well, like I'm literally explaining to you like why you're so poor, getting so economically extracted. Like, you need like an attention span to be able to effectively conceptualize what's actually going on. Because everyone trading in this really utopian system of, fair exchange and equitable transactions and stuff. It's just totally ridiculous. It really almost has no bearing like anywhere. Unless you live in a really like hyper-regulated New Deal economy where cartels are always prevented from growing up and monopoly positions are always mitigated and minimized. And then you get something that looks, the facsimile of something that looks close to that. But that's all like very intentionally created, not just some kind of
natural state.
Yeah, natural state. And yeah, exactly with what you're saying with the Cargill and whatever. We just look at how the commodities futures are exchanged. And, one statistic I heard of recently was like 600 times, was it 60 or 600 times more oil futures contracts are exchanged than actual barrels of oil. The same thing exists in the gold markets, silver markets. All these commodity markets are just totally, utterly rigged for exploitative purposes by people that don't do any of the actual production or labor at all. It's just this giant bloated mass of financial instruments that you have to go to as an intermediary between you and the person producing the goods.
And so this is where, where the American system comes in. I don't know if you want to go all the way back to Benjamin Franklin or if you started Hamilton, but it's sort of, these guys are looking at, okay, on one hand you go with that, the Ricardo or Adam Smith model of just sort of letting capitalism run wild and letting money do what it wants to do.
Well,
go ahead.
These guys, like Franklin and Hamilton, were looking at the world around them and trying to figure out a way to run it better. I mean, Smith and Ricardo were much more describing a world that they were in and trying to justify the people that were paying them to write those books. While Hamilton and Franklin were looking at the world they're in and trying to create a better idea instead of justifying current existence like Smith and Ricardo.
Yeah, and you would expect that, right? I mean, they're like, we're the superpower. Things are great.
Let's keep this thing going.
Yeah.
You did a whole series on the 1830s or sort of...
Yeah, we're still kind of wrapping that up. We're going to do a little bit more of that, and then we're going to try to go to the Reconstruction era.
Industrial age.
We'll come back to the antebellum later. I got too many books bought not to, but we're going to move out of that era because I've just been in that era for eternity. So we're going to look at Reconstruction and more of the labor struggles, basically, because after the yoke of the slavery system was lifted from humanity, then the contention became different of labor rights, monopoly, industrial capitalism became the new kind of foe, if you will. So,
maybe going back to, like, the libertarians always want to talk about the founding fathers, like, to go back to that period of even pre-constitution, between the Declaration and the Constitution, you've sort of got these two competing factions, whether I guess it's the Federalists and the Democrats, where on one hand you've got people like Hamilton and John Adams is more or less over there, and on the other hand it's, Jefferson and the anti-federalist grouping.
Mm-hmm. Slave power elite.
Right.
Pretty much, yeah.
And it's like a combination of the slave power elite and the useful idiots, like Patrick Henry and people like this. I don't know. That seems to be like a pattern that goes through history, where on one hand you've got the people like Hamilton who are in real positions of leadership, and then on the other hand you have these rabble rousers who are always trying to tear down
right.
those protections on behalf of the people with actual power, and that that could be
right.
You might even put Andrew Jackson in that category.
Sure. There is a kind of a long-standing classical liberal or libertarian conception of that there's no, that someone wants to buck any kind of authority but themselves. Mm-hmm. And it's where it's just constantly reductive. And I would just say that the biggest problem of those people, you mentioned Patrick Henry, would be, there's no conception of what does human progress look like, and like how do you move to that position. And then if you're getting something that's close to that, then hey, you should probably do your best to support that administration, not undermine them. Like I remember, years ago, I even hesitate to bring it up, but I heard some excerpt. I wasn't actually actively listening to Alex Jones, just because he really codifies this kind of mindset really distinctly. And he was saying that, people getting electric cars, you're going to be really, hamstrung. You're going to be so limited about how far you can drive, as if it was some kind of master plan of like, we want to trap you to this local area that you can't get far kind of mindset,
Yeah,
but
that's kind of a meme he's got, where the elite want to trap you in the cities and then they're going to shut down the countryside.
Yeah, and it's like, okay, well, you are already getting paid through you're getting gouged through the nose for $4 a gas of gasoline, about $1 or $1.50. That's just pure speculation. And then, other parts of it are quantitative easing, inflating commodity prices, other stuff, right? So, like, that's one source of exploitation. But then, like, the trade is that you're going to not have to pay that anymore, but you're limited in where you're going to drive, right? But I don't know, just seeing like anything limiting your freedom is like engineered or mastermind or to be opposed, but not realizing that a lot of that stuff comes in the forms of trades. Like you are making an exchange to live in society in exchange for some things, and the exchange should be worth it. But in our modern system, it's really not. But the solution to, in a lot of ways, but the solution to that is to reform the system, not to like just keep reducing, burn it down. It's a very destructive mentality. It's always like you can destroy your way out of.
You don't have solutions.
World problems. I don't know if that point was really that clear, but it's just the way that people see power over them, and the lack of a conceptualization of progress, I think, is the biggest problem, right? Because there's no answers in the libertarian world. Like you're just always trying to reduce overhead power, and it just leads nowhere.
So it seems like at the very top level, you have the potential for something like a Hamiltonian elite. Maybe you've got a faction sort of like this in China or Russia that are interested in dirigism or interested in, technology and progress and infrastructure. And then on the other hand, you've got the Wall Street elite who are, Jay-Z and Kanye West getting their money. Beneath those, the libertarians are maybe the useful idiots of the Kanye West faction. Who are, like, what's going on with the left wing? What do you guys see as some of the problems with, whether it's sort of progressives who are interested primarily in, like, the minimum wage fight, or I don't know if you've gotten much into this modern monetary theory stuff, but people who are interested in justice and interested in distributing income toward the masses, but don't really have this conception of the centrality of physical production and technology to that.
Well, the left is in the same position as the right in that it's completely beholden to Wall Street. And so as a way to sell left ideas, they can't talk about labor and getting like a living wage out there. They can't talk about economic development. So they have to like package lots of their ideas as a way to get votes, a way that keeps Wall Street happy. And you're never going to get like a real populist message, a real New Deal message, if you're trying to appease Wall Street while doing stuff under left cover. So, gun control, abortion rights, these are things that you can get some traction on as a left-leaner, but, the people that actually talk about real issues, they get a lot of support. Like, Rubin is coming out for the higher minimum wage of $15, and he's getting tons of support for it from, grassroots. And
Rubin who?
Robert Reich, sorry.
Oh, Robert Reich.
Yeah, what do you guys think about that whole minimum wage issue?
I think it's worthwhile, but if you're not promoting it within the context of other solutions, it would be nice if you had a 15% tariff for 6 months or a year first, and then the $15 an hour minimum wage would be much easier to pay. But with our depressed, low productive economy anyway, I mean, I'm for it just because I would be for it. And the order that we get it is not as relevant as just getting it. And since there seems to be some agitation for it, jump on that. And it's going to mostly come out of the pockets of the Walmarts, the McDonald's, the low wage, low productivity, and ultimately the businesses that are most antagonistic to their own labor force are the ones that are just dreading this idea of a higher minimum wage. And if Walmart had to pay a higher minimum wage, they would have to restructure their business. And they would have to be trying to, work with their labor force to develop, some value add really there. You know what I mean? Rather than just like crushing labor, always downward pressure, right? So a lot of the downward pressure on wages comes from these mega corporations. And by having something like a $15 minimum wage, it's just like a silver bullet against them. To also touch on the topic of the left, I've said in some previous podcasts, it's almost like something that doesn't exist. It's kind of like a mythical unicorn or something, because you're looking at it's this bizarre constellation of political organization that's deeming itself, left of center or progressive, but without any kind of sense of labor or labor rights or blue collar workers,
or even demanding health care. Like they'll kind of say, hey, maybe some healthcare would be cool, but it's talking about like demanding it as a national interest for a modern nation state to have everyone getting the most modern, the best healthcare possible without going to crushing debt. I mean, there's no voices like that in the left. Like Elizabeth Warren is not, as far as left as it gets in the mainstream.
It's already it's coming back to the median.
She's already starting to look a little bit like Obama looked in 2007 and 8, where he was out there for single payer health care when he was a state senator.
Well, and we even saw it with the speech he did with Piketty. I think it was episode 10 we did, and it was her and Piketty doing a forum. And they can't. The problem with Warren, which will always defeat you, is you're not talking about the actual antagonists of civilization and society. You're always, tiptoeing around that question.
Because you're trying to get money from Wall Street.
Yeah, and you're just not trying to be, you're not trying to scare people or, it. I was reading recently on Millard Fillmore, and he was like one of the best presidents that actually existed in the antebellum period, which isn't saying much, from Jackson to Buchanan. And just how his, all the language of the whole context of all political debates and discussions at the time in the antebellum always navigated around avoiding confronting the slave power.
Yeah.
And you couldn't talk about it. You couldn't bring it up. You couldn't say, hey, wait a minute, this is like a destructive, cancerous economic political organization that's going to either consume and destroy this country or be destroyed itself. And that's just unfortunately the reality of it,
Man, on that note, we're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back. Okay, we're back, and you were just talking about Millard Fillmore and sort of this idea of the need to appease Wall Street historically.
Yeah, and Millard Fillmore presided after Taylor died, over the Compromise of 1850, which, I don't know, it's arguable if it saved the country or not, because it was looking to be, you definitely got some rebellions. I don't know if it was going to be full-on secession. It's an interesting topic of discussion. But anyway, so at this era in the 1850s, Lincoln is coming onto the scene, and Lincoln is giving these, fiery, enlivening, electrifying speeches, because he's just coming out and saying exactly what's happening, and he's just totally honest of what's occurring. And during the 1850s, you had already really kind of the Civil War already occurring in Kansas. We had the Bleeding Kansas, and just this where Pierce presided over it from 1852 to 1856. Well, Kansas is just running red with blood. They're moving the capital back and forth, and there's a pro-slavery faction and a abolitionist faction that are killing each other. John Brown's over there killing people. It's just chaos. And Lincoln's on the scene, just seeing what's happening and just speaking truth to power. And that's what it takes. They actually had to target the real enemy of society. And so when Elizabeth Warren gets out there and is tiptoeing around the questions, it's not going to work. You can't. You're not going to just sneak past, the dragon and somehow slay the dragon. You got to go out there with your armor and your sword and your horse and look to destroy it. Because it has to be destroyed, because it's either human civilization or the imperial system will be brought down. And it's really as simple as that.
And if history is a guide, there's a good chance you're going to get destroyed in the process.
Yeah, there's no hiding from something that's trying to consume and destroy the planet. So you better, straighten your spine and look to actually talk about these ideas, because they're all, right there to see. I mean, we're seeing antagonization in Ukraine. We're seeing, the Syrian debacle last year almost coming to a head. They're looking to maintain their dollar hegemony, and unless you're willing to dismantle that, and everything that we just recently talked about in terms of policy direction does that. If you go with the $15 an hour minimum wage nationally, you are basically, of the coalition of the imperial forces, knocking the Walmarts and the McJob economy out of the constellation. They're basically neutralized by those positions, right? And if you want to do parity pricing like Monsanto or Cargill or that whole block of commodity trading, future trading parasites, they're knocked out of the picture. If you want to do the Wall Street sales tax, Goldman Sachs, all the hedge funds, those are knocked out of the picture, right? So it's these are all magic bullets or silver arrows for fighting this monster, But if you don't understand the nature of the beast, then you don't understand why these policy ideas are so vital.
Right.
If you don't have the courage to go out there and be Don Quixote for a bit, I mean, it's never going to happen. You're never going to be like, you know what, you're right. We're just going to take 10% less. That's never going to happen.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's a good point. Courage is a virtue, right? I mean, people forget that they, the left also, another huge always neutralizing, hamstrung thing is that, they're always looking inward, and they don't really think courage exists.
They like to use the word pragmatism, or that you always hear, well, politics is the art of compromise, or
pragmatism,
or the art of the possible, or that kind of stuff.
They're willing to accept crumbs from the table, and in Piketty, Thomas Piketty, you see that from the book, right? Not challenging the fundamental nature of the money power,
not
at all.
Standing history, really.
And that's the thing is you will be destroyed by this too. You want to be a coward. I don't know why you think it's gonna help you. If there's a world war, we're all losers in the situation. So to say the least, and we're all not benefiting from this system at all. It's just totally crushing the generation. So if you want to get out of that, you got to speak truth, and it's I don't know. It's like I've always said. You're building it up so much more to be so much stronger than it actually is.
We're not really in that something that we really need to start talking about is how the situation we're in is not that bad compared to other situations that America has been in the past.
Right.
I mean, I look at studying the antebellum period. You look at the solutions that they have for ending slavery without war, and I look at them and I'm like, man, I don't know if you're going to be able to do that. Like, in reality, you're probably going to have to go to war to destroy that system of slavery.
Yeah, it would be really...
Today, no, I don't think that's even like close to being the case of like a civil war. I mean, these problems we have can be solved, like Matt articulated so earlier, by these systems that have already existed. There's already context for them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's already all this historical data proving that they work. You just have to get the money power out of the... They can't be top dog in the system. You don't have to destroy them completely. You don't have to salt the earth. But you have to like split that oligarchy between industrial capitalists and financiers. You want to get Caterpillar on your side. You want Boeing on your side. You want even the big energy producers on their side. Maybe convert a lot of their science and technology into like fourth generation energy, whatever's next. But you don't want to like take them all on. And so
this might be a stupid question, but why do you suppose that there are so few people in this country who seem sort of equipped to deal with these issues, or who do understand what the problem is? When you look back, and Tarpley had said that I think it was the Wharton School of Business was founded, and the mission statement was basically to carry on the ideas of Henry C. Carey, who was Lincoln's economic advisor and was very open and direct about all the American system.
Uh-huh.
How is it that our legacy is Hamilton and Clay and Carey and Lincoln and JFK, and today
Roosevelt.
And today the best that you're going to get is someone like Robert Reich, who says, there's too much income inequality and maybe we should get a better minimum wage. Why can you not? Is it just the university system, or is it fear?
I would say if you're going to get a leftist like Robert Reich, I think that's mostly not trying to lose their position of money and influence. Because if they do step out, they're going to lose the country club pass. A lot of that. And I think baby boomers just love, not being leaders more than anything. They love standing back and taking no responsibility and being, whatever happens, happens, and just getting continually run by people who make tons and tons and tons of money, and then trying to get, if you're a really successful lawyer and you work for Wall Street, why rock the boat? Why write, a treatise on like federalism? You're making tons of cash. I mean, not as much as the people that hire you, not even close, but you're up there.
Yeah, there's a very prevalent intellectual laziness too, which is just just ever present. It's really quite stunning. People used to learn Latin when they were like 12 years old in school, and knew 3-4 languages by the time they graduated. And they graduated, what was considered high school at like 14, and were off to the races. People had an appetite for knowledge, but in an era in which everything's made by foreigners, it's already kind of mystical, right? Because like everything that they buy, they never see any kind of production process of. That happens like somewhere in like,
Philippines, Malaysia,
China, all these places. So it's almost like the holodeck or something like that in Star Trek, where they're just materializing whatever they want because their dollars can still buy it. Now, until that changes in which their dollar can no longer buy it, then maybe they'll be reinterested in these ideas. Unfortunately, there'll be a huge dislocation.
Well, I'm seeing a lot of interest with, I think the baby boomers are sort of done. And I see a lot of interest in these sort of ideas when I talk to people in their 20s.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I was talking to this person at a bar, and they were all distraught about Monsanto. I was like, well, you can fix this. I mean, self-government. This isn't Saruman. It's going to be okay. You can do this stuff, organization, political action. That's why the state exists, is in order to protect you from, these predatory interests that have always existed. Mm-hmm. I mean, if it's not Monsanto, it'd be a feudal lord trying to get, 15% of your grain.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've sort of been involved in a couple of different political races, and while, we haven't been successful yet, you can start to see that it really wouldn't be that hard to...
Well, the message works, always. It always moves.
Yeah, it's people buy the message entirely, and it's technically not that hard to seize power of like a congressional seat, or you start to build that sort of a movement. You could see getting some senators and governors.
Sure.
Yeah, even just by acting, like I like to say, fighting is winning, because if you're always fighting, you are always pulling the dial in your direction, right? So
like these ideas,
yeah.
So just getting these ideas becoming out there more, because that's the biggest problem, is that the silence with them. They win. Like, could you imagine getting in a debate where you have someone spouting New Deal economics, trade tariff, a neoliberal economist, free trade? I mean, they would lose. The reason why debates are so closed off is because the ideas stink.
I've been talking with Daniela, who's been out petitioning in Nebraska, and hopefully we'll talk about this next week. But that it's been a real eye-opening experience for her, that this is, there's this idea of the red state, and, everyone's just an ignorant hillbilly out there. And she's talking to, people of all ages, and instantly they're responding. They are on board. They're ready to vote for Dan. Everyone they talk to is signing up. It's really just this sort of
common sense. This stuff isn't
right.
It's not magic.
There's just sort of such a dynamic silence in the political arena and in the media and stuff, that it just really would not take much to break through that and just change everything up.
The only thing really holding it together is just the fear of ostracism by the other people
baby boomers
in the power configuration. But I mean, even to Romney's, something you'll never hear me probably say again, to Romney's credit, he said, "I want to slap a tariff on China like first thing." So like, whatever happens with the Republican Party, and they're obviously in chaos and splitting and destruction right now. When the dust settles on whatever the next party realignment is going to be, there will be a socially conservative party, whatever that looks like. I think something like the tariff, historically, has been their go-to thing, and maybe they could, reinvigorate it, right?
Yeah, I mean, let evil do good. If their motivation for the tariff is xenophobia, that's great. Let's get the tariff, and you can.
I think that's the best. Unfortunately, we can probably hope for is Chinese xenophobia, with the elites saying, oh my God, the Chinese are really going to take it, and if we can. The thing is, they believe their own propaganda. So if something can break through their zeitgeist and saying, wait a minute, this actually isn't how it works. And here's a historical account of, no, it actually never was that way. Then that'll change. I don't really seeing their apple cart being overturned until something really big happens with this dollar supremacy. Until the BRICS Bank gets 10 times bigger.
Yeah.
And the dollar surplus out there starts to actually really weigh heavily on the domestic economy, in which some of these ideas might be able to be, some of these myths about America could be dispelled. Like how we got, like Rand Paul with his, his State of the Union rebuff, saying, the founding fathers came over here to get away from regulation and wanted to set up the market casino utopia. It's like, wow, man, that's just stunning, But I probably believes it,
You mentioned Romney. It was in the. Was that in 2008 that he first came up for tariffs, or was that 2012?
2012. He might have said something in 2008, but what I was referring to specifically was the 2012.
And I think that came on the heels of the first guy to call for it was Donald Trump, ironically enough. And even though he is, he's a speculator parasite in some ways, to his credit, he builds casinos and he builds hotels and all this kind of stuff. And
he builds something.
I remember him talking about
better than.
He was talking about, you can't even. He goes out and he tries to get American-made glass for the Trump Tower in Chicago, and there is no such thing. There's no American-made steel. There's no American-made whatever wiring and all this kind of stuff. But he was out there basically saying, well, maybe we need to think about a tariff again, and then he was kind of ridiculed out of the race. But you can imagine with.
But for other things, out of the race for his other unsavory characteristics. But you see, like, he builds stuff and so he can see reality, and that's where you need to find that split between, just the strictly speculative side of the oligarchy and those who actually do things. And that wedge right there really needs to be driven home, and get them to get Boeing to be like Goldman Sachs. No, we need a tariff.
Mm-hmm.
Get GE, and so they can end up supporting politicians who are for these sort of common sense solutions of a tariff, of public infrastructure, of a 1% Wall Street sales tax on all trades of $1 million or more. I mean, these things have a common sense aspect to them that the fruits can be seen, but the purely speculative side doesn't want them at all. And so you get Donald Trump to fight, Jamie Dimon.
Well, and it's a united front, right? The oligarchy is still united enough to say, but it's already breaking apart because of the Export-Import Bank and other contentions. Less loot to be had, so they have to
eat each other. Yeah. That
the consensus among the Beltway insiders and all that is, we don't want a tariff because that they have to pay for that. They have to pay to relocate the factory. They have to pay higher wages. They have to do all that. So their solution is basically abolish the minimum wage, abolish the 40-hour work week, abolish child labor, and so we can just compete, quote unquote, on the same level as Laotian sweatshop slaves, basically.
Right.
But in order to dismantle those systems, that's going to take massive riots, massive dislocation. Who knows? Just.
I don't think it could be done.
Yeah, it's nearly impossible to put that genie back in the bottle of hundreds of years of labor struggle and say now we're just going to take this away. Based on what? Like, how could you ever even? It's just so impossible. But that's what they want.
Mm-hmm.
So like it's not going to work, and they're going to lose ultimately. But the sooner they recognize that, the better it'll be for the country to say, hey, maybe this 15% import tariff will be better than civil war, riots, third world status. I don't know. It's just not going to work. So the sooner they realize that, and they can just pay the piper of the 15%, the better we'll all be, and the trade deficit will be much improved too.
Yeah, where is that? You need like this industrialist faction of the elite, but where is that going to come from in the U.S.? It seems like there is such a thing in China and maybe
Valley
Russia.
Would be a place you could go to.
Well, the economic interests definitely are there, but the problem is they don't have any ideological kernel or nucleus on which to focus their efforts, because that's been so systematically just paved over by the libertarian mindset. If
you look at like GE still builds the best locomotives in the world in like Pennsylvania and Texas, and they were trying to export locomotives to the government of Pakistan, and basically they used the Export-Import Bank to get the contract by giving them this low-cost financing. But in a sense, like companies like GE have been hollowed out by Wall Street, where they've got GE Capital or even like General Motors. I think that a big part of their profit is just on the financing of the vehicles. So even like within those companies, you sort of lose the interest of having those things made in America. They kind of start to think, well, it doesn't really matter as long as we're on top of the financing end of it. They're owned by these mutual fund companies and stuff in terms of their stock shares.
Yeah, but all that position and strength and that kind of mindset comes from the fact of the world reserve status of the dollar.
Right.
Because any other country doing what we're doing, they would destroy their currency within like short order, because they have to maintain a trade balance in order to have their currency have any value. Because what else? If you don't have a balance of exchange, it's going to be driven to hyperdeflation or inflation based on whatever you're doing. So that's always the crux of the matter, is like they can get away with this kind of stuff because there's such this demand for international exchange using the dollar.
Right.
So it can always be shifted. It was the same problem in the 19th century of Britain, right? Why they could just run roughshod over British labor and just crush the hell out of British labor constantly is because you had that same relationship in which you could destroy domestic interests for international maintenance of a value of your currency.
Right.
So that really is the underpinning thing that all of this stuff orbits around, and why they're willing to go to the brink of war and get us brinksmanship is back to preserve this system, because the people, insider banks realize that their balance sheet is garbage without that.
Yeah.
They are totally, hopelessly bankrupt. Without maintenance of that system, they're totally screwed. So, but, doing these things undermines their position, and, they're going to have to be totally destroyed as a class in order for the country to survive and in order for this stuff to continue. But, that's the thing too, is like when if people knew what their interests were on the 99% level, and also the industrialists and the Silicon Valley types and the GEs and the even the Raytheons and those people,
Boeings, and
knew like what their interests were, and like that this ongoing system just can't continue, then it would be over like in a day. So it's just like orienting people in that way is the key point.
Yeah, this is unlike the slavery system, which would have probably taken a war. This is just exposing information.
It's a battle of ideas, yeah.
Silicon Valley is an interesting case. Maybe there's not time to get into that right now, but just because their money is made on, for one thing, manipulation of the stock market, and then for another, just on intellectual property.
Are the people that are manipulating the stock market, are they the programmers? Are they the actual people that create the goods of Silicon Valley, or are they parasites that flew in once they saw a profitable thing to do? Because actual people that make technology work, their interests are squarely aligned with ours.
You could imagine like Apple having an interest in American-made computers, hardware, and
Microsoft too.
Yeah, I guess what I'm getting at is more like when you look at these new, Facebook and PayPal and all these kind of guys. They do have like server infrastructure, but for the most part, it's intellectual property. And there is an interesting article about this Justine Tunney, who's this chick who was with she's like a Google software engineer who runs the Occupy Wall Street website, and she sort of represents this trend of sort of totalitarian anarchist tech people who kind of don't have a concept of physical production.
Yeah, I think there are problems of, like I said, of people thinking that we live in a holodeck or something like that, are a little more compounded because they work in something that's tangible anyway, and then a lot of money with it. It's just hyper gentrification going on there, and they're riding high on this giant stock market bubble that has all those companies' valuations really inflated,
way inflated.
So it's it's kind of their utopianisms are kind of interesting and distinct, but ultimately they are a huge part of us not having just a total hyperinflation of our currency based on not being able to export anything.
Yeah, right.
They're still, even though a lot of what they sell is intellectual property, it still provides immense value. I mean, the computerization boom has increased, like doubled productivity in 10 years or something like that. It's massive, right? So, it is an issue. I don't know. They have their own kind of peculiarisms about probably a little bit more resistant or just accepting of these ideas, just because of what they're doing is so kind of removed, like I'm saying. But ultimately they're still fall in that same camp of the GEs and the
and any
Boeings.
Debate with them exposes their nonsense rather quickly.
Yeah, I mean, so we shouldn't be, I don't know, poo-pooing these various people.
Allies.
I mean, these other allies. It's a coalition that we're trying to build, and so you're going to have kind of widespread social groups in it.
To some extent, though, I feel like you need to create a new myth or a new, there's no built-in coalition who wants thorium power plants or a high-speed rail network, other than people who can sort of
just regular people.
Conceptualize the value of them and sort of project themselves into the future. I think that's maybe one problem, is you don't have like this group who's out there waiting to carry the banner of something. There's just a lot of...
Yeah,
that's us right here. That's what we're doing.
Yeah,
it's us. That's our job. I mean, if it was people who kind of found this stuff out through our own personal journeys, and then put it up to the light and looked at it every way you could and be like, all right, it looks pretty sound. And then when you go out in the world and you expose people to these ideas and they immediately catch on. I mean, that's what we do here, and that's like the goal of this whole project, is to help people understand that these ideas are in their own interests, and they're easy to do, and they would improve their standard of living by quite a bit.
Yeah, and the another hopeful point I like to maybe end on or something is that the reinforcements are already underway. Like we can hear the horses in the distance, basically, with the BRICS Bank. I saw some recent stuff in The Economist of how all the news in the past couple of weeks has been this big gulf widening between the British elites and the United States elites. Things going up in the New York Times about this pedophile ring in the House of Lords, and exposing that, and the BP thing with Russia, they're getting their toes stepped on. So the coalition of the U.S., Anglo, France, Israeli, Saudi kind of aggressive imperial axis is just breaking apart by the external internal pressures of it.
Well, their system is designed to do this. This is what their system does. You can't have a coalition with the system.
Yeah, it's just there's no more loot to be had, and so it's coming apart at the seams. And on top of that, you have the BRICS, breaking that system up even more pronouncedly. And then next year you have China flipping on their thorium prototype, which is huge sea change of year zero kind of stuff, right? Of like if they get going with that, that's going to enable every country to really be totally energy independent. And obviously it'll be terrible for the stock market. You're going to lose like $1 trillion of oil companies and all the companies surrounding them, and the coal export companies, and huge swaths of the old carbon economy being minimized or whatever, but it's already coming, right? So it's just a battle of ideas, and there's no slave power conspiracy that's going to have to
be destroyed physically.
Yeah, have to go to war. There's no fascist army of Nazis that's going to have to be destroyed. Luckily, all these problems are political, and
yeah, absolutely,
just problems of ideas and getting at the right ideas.
When I was in economics classes, I was talking about full employment. People looking at you like your hair's on like that idea that's like a national interest. You want humans to be as productive as possible. And then you can do that in like a free market idea, that it doesn't have to be this sort of Bolshevik Soviet system. I mean, that's a big point of their strength, is they're running these ideas, and the weakness of the left of not being pro-labor.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, we're just hamstrung by centuries of ideas that made up the intellectual wing of imperialism.
Yeah.
And so we just need to challenge these ideas. And it's not, you don't have to be strapping on a musket and fighting a war. You just need to be able to have at least enough courage to speak ideas that are controversial. And, that's all it's going to take. But, our problems can't get solved until we do that.
Yeah. Until
there's people like that are, past Elizabeth Warren in the regards of targeting these systems. I think that'll come into view by the xenophobia, by the contention with China. As soon as any element of the ruling class is, actually freaked out enough to combat them on the economic sphere, when they realize that they're not going to be able to destroy them with speculation and, trying to get them into the neoliberal model of international finance, that it's just not going to work. And when they can finally realize that, you'll have some huge sweeping concessions basically from the ruling class, because then they'll have to actually invest in their labor force to actually compete with China in reality. But that's not going to happen until we remove these roadblocks.
Yeah.
And break apart these.
Which we're already on the way of doing. I mean, the work that you guys are doing in Nebraska and in New York with Cuomo and Berdoff. I mean, this is the pathway. I mean, we read history and we see people exactly like Cuomo, exactly like Berdoff, exactly like
Credico, you mean.
FAA, and maybe they don't win, but they certainly move them to pave the road for the next person, or maybe themselves later on down the line.
All right, guys. Well, I think that's about the time we have. Do you want to tell everybody where they can check out your own radio program?
Yeah, it's newdealradio.com, just like it sounds. And we're also on UCY TV.
iTunes.
We're on iTunes, yeah. We're on iTunes.
New Deal Renaissance on iTunes.
Look up New Deal Renaissance, subscribe. We're also on Facebook, same name. So